Jim Orford, who's down on the programme, the chair of the session. Unfortunately, he can't do that, so I'm standing in. So as we know, as chair of the session, I've been tasked with keeping everyone to time, and I've been asked to let speakers know if they're running over. So as Alicia did last time, well done. Thank you, Alicia. I will do the same. And just to remind you, there'll be 3 presentations over the next hour, 20 minutes each. Each presenter will speak for up to 15 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions and discussions before moving on to the next one. And as with the previous sessions, you can either put questions or discussion points in the chat, which I will look at throughout and make sure I ask those questions first, or raise your hand by going on to reactions and clicking on the hand waving icon during the discussion, and I will see that coming up, and then I will ask you to speak your question. So without further ado, let me with great pleasure introduce Louise Marryat from the School of Health Sciences at the University of Dundee in Scotland, who is going to talk to us about exploring opioid use in pregnancy, antenatal care pathways and neonatal outcomes. So over to you, Louise.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you all today. This is quite exciting tonight because you are the very first people to hear these results, and I'm going to concentrate more on telling you about the outcomes for babies who've been exposed to opioids. And this is a new cohort that we are looking into in Scotland. There we go. It did move. Okay. So I'm going to start by saying a big thank you to my collaborators who are on the screen here, particularly Anne, who has been, I think, my longest suffering collaborator. This is a study that has been about 5 years in the making so far, just to get to the feasibility study stage. So it's been a long time. And Petra Rauchus, who's done the statistical analysis for this stage of the project as well. So Anne's given you a nice summary of the situation in Scotland surrounding opioids. I'll give you a bit more background, particularly in relation to pregnancy. So across the world, opioid use in pregnancy has been rising quite alarmingly, in line with rising opioid use more generally. In pregnancy, the ideal would be abstinence, that women wouldn't use opioids in pregnancy. But for women who are already using opioids when they become pregnant, the advice is to stabilise on medication-assisted therapy. So that tends to be the norm, and particularly in Scotland, that tends to be the norm for women. But so we end up with actually quite a lot of children who are being exposed to opioids in pregnancy, particularly through medication-assisted therapy. But actually, we know very little about the outcomes for these children beyond the first few years. What we do know is that they tend to have poorer outcomes than their peers. So they have poorer social, emotional, behavioural, visual and cognitive and some health outcomes. But we only know about that pretty much in the first few years. We know more about children who have neonatal abstinence syndrome and their outcomes, but that's possibly the tip of the iceberg, because we know that there are children who are exposed to opioids in pregnancy who don't have neonatal abstinence syndrome or aren't recorded as having that. We also have very little evidence on the long-term impacts on children of different types of medication in pregnancy, so methadone versus buprenorphine. And we also don't have very much information on treatment for neonatal abstinence syndrome after birth. And that's a bit of a postcode lottery in Scotland. So depending which health board you're in, babies might tend to be treated pharmaceutically, or they might tend to be sort of observed and have non-pharmaceutical intervention as the first line of action. So there are differences in how these things naturally occur, even within Scotland, and we really know very little about the long-term impact on child outcomes. Part of that is because this research is really hard to carry out. So most of the research that has looked at these outcomes over time uses quite small clinical samples, so following up people that have attended an addiction clinic, and they often have limited amounts of follow-up as well. We also have some big cohort studies, but actually we tend not to capture these families within our original cohort, and they also tend to drop out over time if we do include them in the first instance. And this difficulty in following up this group of children over time was demonstrated really well by a group in Glasgow who attempted to trace and interview 10 mothers in Glasgow with problematic substance use 7 years after they'd had an antenatal interview. And despite huge amounts of effort, they succeeded in interviewing none of these women. So of the 10 children, 1 was deceased, 2 had been adopted, 1 was uncontactable due to the woman living in a women's refuge and the address, for obvious reasons, being kept secret. They did manage to contact 3 people who opted out, and the rest remained uncontactable or unresponsive, despite each woman receiving a minimum of 10 phone calls and 5 attempted visits. And that's just in a very small sample. So trying to get results for a whole population is near impossible. But in Scotland, we actually have really good administrative health data. And this can be at least partly used to get round some of these issues. And that's what we've been trying for the last 5 years to do. So to give you an overview of this project, this is a large-scale administrative data study, so data that's collected routinely through hospital admissions, through prescription dispensing, all sorts of things. And it's a study of all children born in Scotland within our cohorts. And our aims in the study were to build a cohort of children who were exposed to opioids in pregnancy and compare them with 2 matched control groups. At the moment, we have one of those matched control groups. So we have a control group of children who are demographically similar to our main cohort of children. We will in time be getting another control group who have been exposed to opioids through chronic pain relief medication. And that group are interesting because they've got a similar sort of exposure, but demographically, they're a far wider range of demographic backgrounds. But for the moment, we're just looking at our cohort and then our demographic control group. And in this initial feasibility study, which was a bit of a proof of concept, we've been exploring birth and neonatal outcomes, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. And then we are going to match on preschool health and developmental outcomes, so up to when children in Scotland go to school at about age 5. We're also interested in looking at care pathways. We know that children move in and out of care in this group quite regularly, so we're looking at that as well. And we additionally have a PhD student who's about to start who's looking at outcomes for the mother in the 3 years after birth, because we know equally little about those outcomes as well. So how are we doing this? It has been incredibly complex, and that is why it's taken quite so long. We have tried to identify women who are using opioids, either illicit opioids or medication-assisted therapy, in any way we can. So we've ended up with 6 data sets that we're using. We're using prescription data. We're using hospital admissions, so any hospital-related admission for opioid use. We're using antenatal records, so where women have self-reported using opioids in their antenatal records. Psychiatric records, where there's been a psychiatric hospital admission for opioid use. The drugs misuse database, which is essentially our addiction service database, so whether people have accessed substance use services for opioids, and birth records, which is where children have been recorded as having neonatal abstinence syndrome on their birth record. And we looked at this for births between 2009 and 2019. So 2009 is the first good quality available data that we have. And we identified 6,408 pregnancies. And as I said, we've got a control group that looks very similar to our cohort in terms of the age of the mother and the level of deprivation that the children or the family are living in, but have no exposure to opioids. And we can do this in Scotland because all our health records have what we call the CHI number, the Community Health Index number. And this is a number that people are given at birth or when they move and register with a GP in Scotland. And it appears on every health record. And we also have a mother and child CHI linkage key so we can link mothers to their children. Sadly, we can't link fathers to their children. I'm hoping one day we'll be able to do that. But that's how we can identify this exposure during pregnancy, and then we can link it to the children's outcomes. And in the long term, we're hoping to link with health, but also education and justice outcomes as well. And today I'm going to be presenting very early results about the cohort and about the neonatal outcomes. And as I say, you are the very first people to see these data. These are not published data as well, so please don't share them beyond this forum. So I thought you might be interested in knowing where opioid use is recorded in pregnancy. And we had our suspicions that if we just looked at antenatal records, we wouldn't capture everyone, and we were right. So about 71% of women had their opioid use recorded in their antenatal records. About 54% appeared in prescription data. 42% had exposure to opioids recorded in the birth record. So that's 42% of children were recorded as having neonatal abstinence syndrome in their records. About 23% appeared in the drugs misuse database. The quality of that database isn't great, so we weren't terribly surprised. About 9% appearing in hospital admissions and just under 1% appearing in psychiatric hospital admissions. And women could appear in more than one of those. And we could look at what other drugs were reported as being used in pregnancy. This is just for our cohort women. And just under 18% of women were using heroin during pregnancy. So, yes?
Louise, I just don't want to interrupt you, but you've only got about 5 more minutes left of your presentation time. So I wonder if you actually want to get on to what you found rather than about the things like this.
Yeah. Okay, that's okay. And there was quite a range, but obviously this is only what women report. And alcohol use. So we looked at alcohol use in our cohort, but also in our control group as well. It was much higher. So this is women who used 14 or more units per week, or self-reported as that. And it was much higher in our cohort than our control group. And that's our characteristics as well. So about half of our families appearing in the most deprived area level deprivation quintiles, which is sort of what we'd expect. We did have a range of conditions that women who used opioids in pregnancy were more likely to experience. Things like having a mental health condition, it was quite high, being anemic, having asthma and epilepsy, being a carrier of viral hepatitis, and having a baby showing signs of fetal distress during labour. Now, some of these things are really important when we look at later developmental outcomes, because for some treatments, for example, of epilepsy, they can have impacts themselves on children's growth and development as well. But women who used opioids were less likely to be obese, and the conditions that came with that as well. In terms of neonatal outcomes, babies exposed to opioids in pregnancy were more likely to be born very early. So 17% of our cohort were born preterm compared to about 6% of controls. They weighed less at birth. So they weighed an average of 500 grams less at birth. Some of that is likely to be related to prematurity as well. They're likely to have a below normal APGAR score. So this is how we assess how well or how poorly a baby might be, normally in terms of how much they might need resuscitation right after birth. So they were more likely to have a below normal APGAR score. And not surprisingly, they were more likely to receive care in the neonatal unit. So 37% receiving care in the neonatal unit compared with 7.5% for our controls. And they were more likely to stay for longer. So our cohort tended to stay in the neonatal unit for an average of 14 days compared to 8 days. And they were more likely to be discharged from hospital to foster care or local authority care, so out with the mother's care by some way. They were very slightly more likely to die in infancy, although the numbers are really, really small, and this wasn't significant. Those that did die died at a later stage as well. We're talking in terms of days, but the numbers are very small there. Interestingly, we found no evidence for smaller head circumference or for stunted growth in terms of length, which other studies have found. Now, we're not sure if that's to do with other studies looking specifically at children with neonatal abstinence syndrome, so those children being more severely affected perhaps, or there's also some evidence that methadone and buprenorphine might affect those things differently. So perhaps it's wrapped up in that, and that needs a bit of further investigation. So we are seeing some anticipated differences at binary level. I don't think there was anything that was hugely unexpected there. We need to work more to look at outcomes controlling for those confounders, so controlling for gestation and things like that. And we want to look at results over time, because we suspect that over those 10 years, things have been recorded differently. And we need to look at that in a bit more depth. As I said, there were some unexpected non-findings that we need to do a bit of digging down and do some sensitivity analyses around those to find out a bit more about what seems to be going on there. What's the difference with our cohort? Is it that we are capturing that wider group of children? And then our next stage is to add our pain relief control group and look at those outcomes right up throughout the preschool period, which would be very exciting. So thank you very much to the EDRIS team, who are the people that link our data, as well as our funders, the Chief Scientist Office and the ESRC. And I'm very happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Gosh, thank you so much, Louise. What a very important and fascinating and interesting study. And a reminder that when we talk about affected family members, often we're thinking of lots of children and adults, various sorts, parents and partners and so on. But babies obviously are also very much affected family members, and we know so little about them. We have a quick look. No, we don't have any questions in there. So I'd like people to raise their hands, and that will hopefully show up for me immediately. And while I'm waiting for people to ask their questions, I'm going to ask some of my own. I mean, first thing, I think I just want to make a comment, which is about this use of records. Now, I've been in awe of Scandinavian research for very many years, because going right back to when I started in this area in the late 1970s, they had access to these amazing ways of linking data together. And I didn't know we could do that in this country. So can you just say a little bit more about how you managed to do that, and if anybody else is doing it?
Well, it's very much in Scotland at the moment. So our data linkage joining is much better, I think, in Scotland. There's been a lot of data linkage studies around the drugs deaths data recently. There was a very interesting paper out by Emily Tweed, who'd been looking at the drugs deaths data and looking at overlaps between not only prescribing and multimorbidity, but also homelessness and other sort of wider socioeconomic experiences that people have. That was looking at data linkage in Glasgow. So often it's not as easy on a national level to link to education data and justice data because they hold different identifiers. So we're getting there, but it's not quite as good. But at a local level, we're a bit better at doing that. But
I think it's amazing. But I mean, I don't want to ask too many questions about this data linkage, but it is really important for everybody. I think how have you dealt with the ethical issues which always seem to come up as soon as you start talking about accessing data? As someone said, would this be a GDPR issue? So just a comment that's come up immediately. How have you got round that?
So we have. It's legally complicated, but we have an exception to GDPR, is my understanding of this. We have to state our legal basis for our use of the data, and our legal basis is that we are using it in the public interest. But there are special access arrangements, as Anne has put in the chat. We have this PBAP panel. This is part of the reason it takes so long. This is a public benefit and privacy panel, and it's a panel that's made up of people from the NHS, from Scottish Government, but also a lot of lay members as well. And every application that wants to use linked health data has to go through the PBAP process. So, and you have to specify at a variable level everything you want to access. And it's really tricky because you're not seeing your data, but you have to specify that. So there are things like, we wanted to know baby's date of birth and date of death because we wanted to know in days, was there a difference in that between our cohort? And we had to really justify that because that's clearly very sensitive data. You also have to be approved as a researcher to access those data, and it's all accessed through the safe haven setting. So you either physically go to a pod, which is not, there's no internet linkage, or I can access it within the university setting, but it's within a separate setting, so I can't take any data out. So this is, I was waiting for our data to be disclosure control checked to tell you about it tonight, because it has to go through 2 people within the NHS who check all our results and check that nothing I say might identify anyone. Okay, so it's very well controlled.
To stop. I mean, this is fascinating, but actually really important. And have stuff been written about how you go through this, and are there lessons to be learnt for England and Wales about how we might do this, and other countries? I mean, the whole point about being an international, Ali from Italy just said, you're like Sherlock Holmes. Absolutely. We are going to have to stop, but if there are any papers, obviously you haven't written any papers about this project yet, but if there are any papers about the process of how you do this data linkage and what lessons we could learn, if there aren't any, then you should write one. And if there are any, then yes, please, can you put them on the chat so people can access them? That would be really helpful. Louise, thank you so much. We need to move on. So our next presenter, it's my pleasure to introduce Janina Dyba from the German Institute of Addiction and Prevention Research at the Catholic University of Applied Sciences, North Rhine in Westphalia in Germany. Janina, hello, it's nice to see you again. Who's going to talk to us about, and again, this is the second presentation, you see how well we've programmed it, about children. So this presentation is about slightly older children, possibly, reaching children of parents in detoxification treatment, the Pepe Kids Project. Janina, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will try to get my presentation. Can you?
Yeah, we can now see that.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for having me again this year. I'm presenting different results, this time from a project we did at our research institution in Cologne, Germany. And as you already said, it's about the attempt to reach children of substance using parents during parental detoxification treatment. We have no conflict of interest to declare, and I'm going to give you a little background on the project itself. It's called Pepe Kids in Germany, and it's an acronym, but in English it doesn't work. But the English title would be Psychoeducative Prevention Program for Children of Parents in Detoxification Treatment. It was funded by the Federal Joint Committee, GBA in Germany, and we conducted it. And the lead investigator was Michael Klein. And the duration of the project was May 2018 until December 2021, because we got a few months more due to the pandemic that fell in the in the project phase. Well, and this is probably one of the most important people in the project. This is our mascot, Pepe. That's his name. And he accompanies the children, adolescents throughout, well, their potential first information on parental substance use, and also he accompanies me today throughout this presentation. Yeah, so I'm going to keep the introduction and background really short, because I would like to focus on the materials we developed and how we evaluated them in the end. We know that children and adolescents from families affected by parental substance use are known to be at high risk for the development of substance use disorders, other mental illnesses, or behavioral problems and other developmental issues. And reaching them early and through non-stigmatizing approaches is of great importance. And well, our idea was that parental detoxification treatment is a highly frequent treatment. It's for many parents or for many people with substance use disorders, the first step in their treatment, in their inpatient treatment, and it might offer an opportunity for to implement an early and preventive measure for the children. The goal of our project was to develop materials and implement them for children aged 8 through 12, and materials for adolescents aged 13 and above. And we intended to reach the parents through 3 cooperating clinics, and all parents were supposed to be patients currently in detoxification treatment. I have to say that in Germany, we have 2 different kinds of detoxification treatment. We have a regular detoxification where it's just focus on the physical withdrawal symptoms, which lasts about a week. And we have a qualified detoxification treatment, which includes also motivational aspects and lasts up to 3 weeks. So we aimed at the qualified detoxification treatment because it has a stronger focus on the psychological and psychotherapeutic topics. We intended to develop a booklet for the children, which we succeeded in, because you could see it on the picture on the top of the presentation. And also we developed online materials for adolescents aged 13 and above. And they were implemented in an existing website called KitKit. KitKit is a German website where children can get online support. First, it was just children from substance-using families. Now it's children from with parents with mental illness, substance use, or other problematic parents, as we call it. So we made subdivisions on this website just for our materials. And we intended to evaluate both materials by the target group, so the children of parents in detoxification treatment. And we wanted to have a short standardized assessment of the family situation, children's and adolescents' psychological situation, their resources and coping strategies through self and parent reports. How did we develop the materials? Well, first of all, we cooperated with the local substance use treatment service, and we had 2 approaches to develop it. We did it theory-based and selected relevant content in the literature, what we could find. And we also had a participatory development. So we had 2 focus groups, group discussions with children, one with children and one with adolescents from substance using families. And we talked to them about their experiences with parental hospital stays or substance use treatment. The younger children didn't know very much about the parental treatment. The older children knew way more. But when parents and children were separated, how were their experiences? How did they keep in contact? What were their wishes, their needs? How did they cope with their family situation or with difficult emotions? And we also talked about how they received their information, if they liked, if they did internet research, if they used posters or flyers, what would appeal to them, and also how they liked their materials to be designed. So the result was our materials, and on the right you can see that's the content structure of our booklet. I'm going to focus on the booklet because if I put the website in, it's just going to take too long. And since I assume that you don't all speak German and the materials are in German, I translated them for you. So in the end, after the development of the materials, we had the following subjects we talked about with the children. It is what is addiction, how is it treated, and what happens during detoxification treatment, to explain to the children, okay, what is this process all about? And then we had the second focus on the emotional situation. Is it okay how I feel? Am I alone? What can I do when I don't feel well? Or who can help me? So we had 2 clear focuses, emotional coping and also help services, support services. And on the other side, just basic information on the parental problem. and parental treatment, of course. Well, we designed the booklet to be like a little more, to be appealing and interactive. So we started off with just going to show you so you can get an idea. So it's not just children reading information all the time, but it's about engaging them. And we had a little, they could put in their little profile with a nickname, their age, and their hobbies. We had a quiz on the information we gave. Regarding substance use treatment, and also just basic recommendations, which we actually derived from the speaking with the children, adolescents themselves. It's speak with someone you trust, meet with your friends, find a safe space, or do something that you like, that you enjoy, and talk about your feelings. All that were recommendations actually children and adolescents gave from their experience when they had trouble at home or were dealing with problems with their parents. Well, and we intended to reach to children through the parents in the clinics, as I already said, and we planned on recruiting the parents, talk to them about the project, and then have a little standardized parent report assessment. And with parental consent, we would send out the booklet or website link, or give it to the parents. We had a flyer for the website with a QR code, or the booklet themselves. And children could either paper pencil or online evaluate the skills and do a quick report on their well-being. We did the health-related quality of life here, and personal resources. And initial recruitment of participants was super difficult. We had expected that it was going to be challenging to engage parents, but we did not expect to be this challenging because they were really hard to engage. Super volatile. When we made like 10 appointments at a clinic, probably 2 people showed up, and one of them did not fit our criteria to involve them in the project, but we kept going. And also had to get in close contact with the staff at the hospitals to keep the parents engaged, them, take away the feelings of shame, and talk to them about the expectations regarding the project, because we had a lot of parents that thought we could give them advice on how to deal with child welfare services, and that was not our aim. And what was very difficult with regard to the research project was the custodial situation. It was highly challenging because most parents that were currently patients were not in custody of their children anymore. And the family situation was difficult, so we could not get them to give us written consent to contact the children. And we could also not inform the other parent or involve the other parent, because we could not talk to the other parent about the treatment and problem of the former spouse. So this was really challenging, and then COVID-19 hit, and it was really problematic. So we had the detoxification wards at the clinics were closed. They had no admissions for the first lockdown. We had no right to access the hospitals, so we researchers could not access the hospitals and talk to the parents. Less numbers of parents actually got treatment because they had their children at home, homeschooling them. So it was super, super challenging, and we had to change our idea to have an evaluation of this target group. So we had professionals in the field rate our materials. We did a standard rating scale and also qualitative interviews. And we had children and adolescents with no family background with substance use, right, the materials. And we also did a final survey with our cooperating clinics. I have just a little data to present. Well, I have more data to present, but I think that this project was a little more about the experience trying to implement it than the results, because the professionals were really fond of our materials. They said it provided age-adequate information and adequate knowledge on detoxification, treatment, and addiction. And also, we were intended to have the information resource-oriented, which they also agreed with. And the only things that were not agreed with as much was the booklet is appropriate for their own field of work. That is because they had different areas of work, and not all of them were actually directly in contact with the children. So they said it would be more difficult to use. Well, we were really satisfied with that, but we also at least got, and I want to call it a glimpse at the situation of parents in detoxification treatment and the children. We reached 5 parents before the COVID lockdown. We started our phase of data collection in February 2020. And as I said, it was hard to engage the parents. And in March 15th, I think it was when we had the first lockdown in Germany. During that time, we could interview 5 parents. We actually had to do an interview with them because many of them could not read or write. We did not expect that either to this extent. So we did an interview. We did the standardized assessment through an interview, and we engaged 3 mothers and 2 fathers with an average age of 40 years and a very small standard deviation. So they were all around the same age, which was quite interesting. I know it's a small sample, but I found it quite interesting. They had 14 children, and more than half of the children did not live with a parent in treatment currently, and most of those parents did not have any children living with them while they were in treatment. And they all reported prior detoxification treatments, all of them. 2 had been into rehabilitation treatment, which means like the longer treatment after detoxification. All had been in outpatient psychotherapy, and 4 had visited self-help groups. And most of them also had contact with child welfare services, and 3 currently received help. Which I found interesting was that the children did hardly receive any services or care. Just 1 parent reported an outpatient psychotherapy for 1 child, and 1 reported a different form of support for the child. I assume maybe an outpatient substance use treatment, a group for children or something. So we have 5 parents and 14 children, and the children hardly received any support, and the parents had gone through a lot of treatment already. So this was quite an interesting finding, even though the sample is really small. Well, what can I say and conclude about this? Well, we were super happy with the developed materials, and they were highly accepted. Of course, this is not a design where we did a pre-post measure and looked if it would actually help the children, but we assume it might be of support, or at least spread some sensitivity towards the topic, especially with the parents or the also the professional workers. And the materials were accepted by children, adolescents from a random sample, and thus we provided treatment clinics around North Rhine-Westphalia, which is the county, or not county, but well, the state within Germany we live in. And we gave it to detoxification treatments and also outpatient services. And we are surprised how many requests we received to send out more booklets or more information. Since the setting of detoxification treatment is highly frequented and also repeatedly frequented, we still think the availability of materials for children and adolescents affected by the parental substance use disorder is of great importance, even though we're not able to engage the parents much further. But it might be a first step. Since their situation appears to be really problematic, and the children's as well, but they seem to be rarely involved with professional services. The problem with the engaging the parents, that's what we found, needs a lot of resources. So this means resources by professionals in the institution. And of course, since COVID, there have been no free resources, I know, in inpatient treatment in Germany at all. But I think in the long term, it will be helpful to have the professionals be have sensitivity for the topic, resources and time to engage with the parents, and of course also do networking in case parents are interested. And that needs some skill, and maybe they need some skills to be trained in, because the barriers of the parents are so high, which includes emotional stress and these feelings of shame and guilt, because when we did the interviews, we could tell that many parents, we had to stop repeatedly, and because they started talking about the personal situation they had, were emotionally highly stressed, and that's why we refrained also from using telephone interviews or digital interviews during COVID, because we knew the parents needed the personal support when talking about the situation. Yeah, so that's it for the Paper Kids project, and say thank you, and want to see if you have any questions.
Janina, thank you so much for another really interesting and important study, and so extremely well presented as well. So thank you so very much indeed. There's quite a lot of chat in the chat. We've only got 2 or 3 minutes, but let's quickly go through some of them. One, you answered some of them. So one person has asked whether the leaflets are printed in English, and
Not yet, no.
thank you for doing the translation for us. But I recognise that these are German language things. But nevertheless, there's no reason I would have thought. I don't know what you feel about people actually translating your materials, and that might be something which people could discuss with you and with Mikhail.
Yeah, we're open to that, I believe. Yeah.
Do you know about the steps to cope intervention,
Yes.
which is the derivative of the 5-step one, which Lorna has been instrumental in developing? I mean, what do you think about the similarities between what you've done and steps to cope?
You have to. What do you mean by what I think about the similarities? Like,
well, I mean, but Mary Morris has asked that, and Lorna Templeton's also responded in some ways about the overlaps between.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously not surprising. What ways of working with people, there are often overlaps between the solutions that people come up with. Was it something that you were mindful of?
Of course, that's why I said when we developed the materials, we went theory-based and also participatory. So we looked, okay, what are the needs and demands in this target group? And of course, this is just compared like to the steps to cope, which is way more extensive, of course, and way more individualized. We just looked through, also evidence-based, of course, approaches to children and adolescents, and also had this for sure had an influence on the development of the material.
I mean, one of the most interesting things is the decision you made in the online version, which is to think about, and on your website generally, to, in a sense, link together the difficulties children have with parents with addiction problems and parents with mental health problems. And that was the same decision that they took with Steps to Cope, thinking actually there's sufficient overlap there.
Yes.
Okay, there's a lot more stuff in the chat, which I mean, we haven't got time to go into. So, Janina, it's generated a lot of interest by people talking about, and a lot of stuff about how difficult it is to work with parents, and even more to try and use parents to access children. Goes back to Louise's project about using records to do that, and how, in some ways, difficult though it is, it has a different set of difficulties than the ones of actually working with people and trying to work with their feelings of resistance to even the idea that their children might even know anything about it, you know, even though they're actually in detoxification at the time that they're saying that. So very, very complex material. Huge congratulations for all the wonderful resources and wonderful work, and obviously nice to see that this work of thinking about how to help children, which Mikhail and I and others started years ago with the NCARE project, is still going on. Now we need to move on. Thank you so much, Janina.
Yes.
It's my great pleasure now to introduce Rebecca McCall from the organisation Scottish Families Affected by Alcohol and Drugs, which is a Scotland-wide organisation that works to support affected families. Rebecca, hello Rebecca, is going to introduce a short film produced by a Scottish young persons group titled I Am Not Alone, and then she's going to lead a short discussion about the film and its contents. So Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share with you a quick few slides before I show you the film, just to introduce a little bit about Roots, so that's in context for when you see the film. So I'll just share that for you now. Okay. So Our group's called Roots, and Roots was a 3-year national young persons demonstration project, which was to co-design. I have to stress the whole project was co-designed with the young people themselves to test out a new model of support for young people aged 12 to 26 affected by someone else's alcohol or drug use in Scotland. It was run by ourselves, Scottish Families Affected by Alcohol and Drugs. As you introduced, don't need to go into that, we're a national charity that supports anyone impacted by someone else's alcohol and drug use. The project is based in East and West in Bartonshire. For anybody who doesn't know, that's sort of the back of Glasgow. And the young people designed the project from start to finish, and they even chose the name Roots, which refers to their own beginnings that they should feel proud of, but not defined, ashamed or stigmatised by them. And they went for the spelling Roots instead of ROTS, because they felt that this reflected how their upbringing, or their roots in the other sense, should not define the route that they choose to take in their own future. The logo was also designed by the young people themselves, and they've been involved from the beginning, and they've really been integral to making Roots what it's came to be today at the end of the 3-year demonstration period. Okay, so what does Roots do? I've created a little collage here from some of the activities that the young people get up to all year round. They really wanted the group to serve as time away from their home lives rather than focus upon it. So our Roots team worked collaboratively with the young people to develop a busy agenda with different events and activities such as photography, drama, sports. They also get assistance with any job, college and university applications. They've run drug and alcohol awareness sessions and trips to events such as the Recovery Walk and rehabilitation centres in Scotland as well, to give the young people an insight into the impacts of alcohol and drugs and helping them understand what might be going on in their own families as well. So one of my colleagues put together this little clip of what the Roots young people got up to this summer, so I thought it would be quite useful just to show you that really quickly. It's only about a minute long, just to get a little taste of what Roots do on a normal summer holiday. Play that for you just now. That's a little taste of our Roots summer. They do get out and about a lot. They're always outdoors, weather permitting, of course, but we do try and get them out and about as much as possible. So one of the most important parts of Roots is the value of bringing young people together who share similar experiences. I think the impacts of that have just been completely invaluable. We've seen reductions in loneliness, isolation, and stigma amongst the young people themselves. They're able to speak to one another, speak to people who've had similar experiences that they might not be able to speak about with other peers. The staff have also developed really strong positive relationships with the young people's families, which they were a bit unsure about that to begin with, but that's worked out really well, and they've developed really strong relationships with the whole family. And they've also been able to support the young people through lockdowns and their families too, with food parcels, supermarket vouchers, things like hygiene essentials, homeware, access to technology when they were doing homeschool during the lockdowns. And they've also developed really strong partnerships with school and social work and other youth projects as well. So they've really created a whole network of people who are working with these young people in their local area. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to share with you a few quotes from our evaluation report earlier this year from the young people themselves, just so you can get a taste of how the young people feel about the project as well. This young person down at the bottom, coming from a background of everyone's disappointing, it's just so strange and different. You feel like you can actually trust them, and they bring you food and snacks when there's nothing in the house, presents on Christmas and your birthday, even bring stuff for your siblings. You just feel so loved and welcomed. I think that quote just perfectly symbolises what the Roots team and what the service means to the young people, and the support, even things like getting them gifts on their birthday when they might not get something otherwise. It's really important to them, and to give them things that they might not get otherwise. And there's a quote from a teacher that I included as well about how the Roots service and having the Roots staff on hand has helped them to provide an extra layer of keeping young people safe. and it gives them an extra pair of eyes into what can be a dangerous and volatile situation for some young people. So it's been really useful as well for safeguarding young people and keeping them safe and knowing what's going on at home, and everyone's been involved in that. So I will stop sharing the slides now and I will bring up the film for you. Turn that and I will sound. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, it's just come up. Okay.
Perfect. I will play it now.
I like the broad talent board of film classification.
It was done in collaboration with this company in Scotland called Broad Talent, so they've got to get their creds as well. Right, I will play it now.
Late again, but who cares? My mum doesn't. People might think it's cool. I'm allowed to do what I want, stay out all night if I want. But it's not right for a 14-year-old, is it? I feel alone in there, at home. I know other people have it worse. I shouldn't complain. If I go in, I'll be surrounded by people. That should help, but it exhausts me. My problems are too much for other people. I'm constantly trying not to cry. So I'm maybe better on my own. On good days, it makes me feel strong and independent that I can look after myself. But there's not a lot of good days and I don't want to look after myself. If I seem angry or anxious or stressed, it's because I am. I'm fed up. One day, it might not be like this. This is the place I feel safe, where I feel understood. I don't need to explain what I'm going through, because they know. I'm not the only one going through this stuff. For the first time in my life, I have support. I have lifelong friends. I can just be me. I now realise there is nothing for me to be ashamed of, and one day, things will be better. I am not alone.
Everybody that comes is in a similar situation, and it means that they can make friends with people who understand what they're going through. I think when you've got somebody in your family that uses drugs and alcohol, it's not something that's talked openly about amongst, you know, your school friends and different people, and you've maybe only got certain friends that you would talk to that about, or you don't have anybody that you would talk to it about. So I think it's nice to come along and meet other young people and see that you're not alone. And if I'm speaking to somebody, that's what I would normally tell them. Come along, everybody's so friendly. There's nobody that ever comes into the group that's not welcome.
Probably the first time I ever came to group when we went to the stables and everyone was so much nicer than I was expecting them to be, because I thought everyone was going to be mean, but they weren't. They were really nice. It's like a sociable place where you can find people going through similar situations as you, to like, and you make lots of good friends, and even if you don't want to like go to groups, you always just have someone to talk to.
I would describe Roots as somewhere you can go along with your peers and let out your stress and just speak to people your own age about your problems.
I really like it because you get to meet new people, and if you're stuck in the house, then it gets you out.
Roots is kind of like a place you can go to like hang about with people that like know what you've been through and like have been through similar experiences and we do fun stuff.
They've been let down in the past, and so they then have a sort of suspicion about people, or particularly professionals, and think that they won't be around or that they're going to let them down. So they just start off thinking, I'm not going to bother. And so for us, it's great that we have the time, that we can persevere. And so if they don't answer our texts or don't turn up for meetings, then we just keep trying and persevering and turning up. sometimes to the point of being quite annoying, and I think they just think, oh, for goodness sake, right, okay, I'll go out with you, and then we can start to build a trusting relationship. And it also helps that we have a budget, and so we can do fun things, or if we can go to the cinema with them, we can take them from McDonald's, we can get their nails done. And I think doing fun things like that helps to sort of establish a relationship, but then after that it becomes much deeper, and you can start to do some really positive work, which is a real privilege to be able to work for an organisation where you have the time and the money to invest in young people. And I think that that is one of the reasons that Roots is such a success.
Good. Sean? It was good.
Good. Good. It was the best thing ever.
Was it?
Now can I die?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Please
It was really good and I loved it. It was so good.
It was brilliant, man. It was class. Yeah, I mean, I got on a motor.
That was so good.
Really
I can't believe I did that.
That was amazing.
Everybody loves it, you know, and everybody comes back after it, and it's always good feedback saying they love it, and it's one of the best days out they've ever had.
The fact that the young people who may not see their social workers often because we have a massive caseload, to know that Roots is there and they are getting a service, and think practical things such as food bank, vouchers, that kind of thing, plus the abundance of activities that they do, definitely takes the pressure off of us. All the social workers in the office would agree with that. These are often the big bad guys, so for us to convey information and to share information with yourselves who can approach your young people maybe in a different way without there being the social work kind of stigma attached, often with parents, that's often a good in as well.
Supporting them through difficult times and building really good relationships with them, which takes a lot of pressure off myself, a lot of pressure off the parents, and the kids have a ball.
It's made a big difference because Lee gets to go out and spend time on his own away from the other children. He gets to do activities that I wouldn't be able to provide for him or take him on because I've got so many. He gets somebody he can speak to, or multiple people he can speak to, including like Claire and Callum, which he gets on really well with both of them, and the help that they give is absolutely amazing.
Actually, there's a connection between school and the Roots programme, and keeping the young people in touch, knowing that they're not on their own. I think it's an invaluable sort of support and service.
That's that. So thank you for listening. I hope you all enjoyed that, and thank you for having us as well. Ready for any questions if anyone's got any?
Wow. Wow is the first thing to say. That was absolutely superb and quite stunning, extremely affecting and moving. It's really interesting. If you have time, I don't know if you did look on the chat while it was going to see all the comments that were coming up and the huge amounts of thumbs up and claps and everything. I mean, this audience here is obviously in awe of what you've been able to do. I think it looks like an amazing service and a really amazingly well put together film, which very briefly summarizes so much. So it's absolutely fantastic. Let me just see if what we've got here. And so lots of people saying what brilliant work and everything, and how moving it is. I think Lorna's made the point that it's very powerful that the young person in the film said that the reason against seeking out or engaging with support is that they feel their problems are just too much for other people. And that's a really important thing, I think, that for so many young people, for so many people generally, they feel that their problems are a burden, such a burden on other people, and that no one's going to be able to understand. So I think that's really powerful. Candice, your hand's up, so come straight in and ask a question.
Well, thank you so much for that. I don't know if I have a question, but I wanted to just say, a part of my work is around participatory action research, and the value of using age-appropriate and interactive participatory collaborative methods to engage young people. And I just wanted to commend you on that, because I think this is it really showcases that it's not always easy to do this kind of work, and I'm sure it must take a lot of time to be able to engage with young people. But I think the value of it at the end of the day is that you have this engaged piece of work that is meaningful, that is ongoing, that leaves a legacy in the lives of young people, and that I'm sure that they probably feel that they need to continue that legacy with other people. So I think this is brilliant, and it's something that we can definitely learn. How do we do this and adapt this in different spaces, and think about the value of that? So I just wanted to say that, and say well done.
Yeah, indeed, it's a model for us all to think about. Someone has raised the question about future funding. This obviously was funded. I don't know whether it's still funded. When does the funding run out, and what are you going to do in terms of being able to continue it?
My colleague Claire is, which you might recognise her from the film, maybe stars in the office with me, so I thought it would be good to bring her in because she's the roots expert. She's our senior development officer for young people, so she's probably best placed to answer this question.
Thank you.
Come in.
Hello.
Thanks. Hello. I've never been called an expert on anything. I'm quite excited. The funding, actually, it was a pilot project, and the Scottish Government really like it. The Drugs Minister came to watch that video with the young people answering questions, which was really powerful because they're much more interesting than listening to us. And they're really keen to hopefully roll it out. So we're just waiting for confirmation on funding for that. So we're not sure if that's going to happen, but our own funding for the pilot project has been continued, which was really important. I think that one of the big parts of Roots being a success is that there's not a limit on the support, on the time, like when they come and they meet us, they say, like, how long have we got it for? Because they're used to sort of telling their story, and then maybe say we can work with you for six months, but actually we can work with them until they're 26. And that's been amazing, working with people from when they're 13 to 16, taking them for the first day of college, sitting outside in case they get nervous. So kind of doing a role that a parent might do, but they're not able to at this moment, not taking their place, but just, being there. And it's up to us to fit in with their life rather than them fitting in with us. So, like their chat, they don't monitor what they're saying, which is, we're not a teacher, and that's really important. Like, it's really a real privilege, like I said in the video, to be able to.
I think there are some really important lessons here for lots of us to learn. I always bang on about whether people are writing up what they do, but the reason for that is if things aren't written up, then nobody knows about them. So yes, we've got this conference presentation and this small group of people who are here who have heard it, and you've got the film, but you're talking about some really important and powerful things. You're also talking about how you manage to get political and social policy clout behind you, which is one of the areas that we are desperate to learn how we can to understand how we can do that. To get the minister to come and actually sit down with the children who made this, and then it's difficult to see how they couldn't be won over to think, well, I must try and secure funding for this to carry on. So there are so many lessons there. Jan Larkin from Turning Point in England has written about how important it is about perseverance, and how you're dealing with people where, in so many cases, where if people don't turn up for 1 or 2 appointments, then they're seen as being discharged and not really interested. And the whole perseverance issue about how you've got to be there and stay there is just so fascinating and important. And you've got your hand up. I should finish, but I'll let you come in. So one quick question.
I think Gallus was before me.
Oh, well, Gallus is going to have a chance later.
Oh, okay. So I thought that was really good demonstration of how powerful these projects can be, and how helpful they are for the development of children. I'm doing a study at the moment where we're involving parents who are prescribed opioids and who have care of their children, and the parents themselves talk about how valuable these kind of programs are, in terms of offering fabulous opportunities for children. But one of the things that's come out of our research is most of these parents are very poor, You know, they're living in abject poverty. And the point they make is that these programs allow their children to engage in all these activities that basically they cannot afford. They have not got the money or the luxury of the time and all the rest. They haven't got transport. They haven't got, you know. So there's been some interesting discussions because on the one hand, they really appreciate it for their children. And on the other hand, it's kind of undermining for them. You know, it's almost like, you know, this is something that I'm just not able to provide my children because I'm poor. I don't have a car. I can't take them to the zoo. It's not on a bus route. Da 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 da. And one thing that they've talked about is how important it is for them to actually take part in these activities with their children. So it's more of a kind of family opportunity, if you like. And I'm just wondering about what the young people think of that, you know, in terms of whether you've explored that, you know, in terms of, you know, would they want activities that actually include their parents rather than exclude the parents? I'm sorry, I'm challenging. I'm being a bit challenging.
No, that's a great question. And just last weekend, Scotland had the recovery walk, and I took 2 mums and 2 daughters, and it worked really well. But I also think that the mums both have addiction workers, and the young people are really have never had a worker of their own, so they're quite territorial. Even when they have siblings, they're like, Claire, can someone else work with my sibling? So we have great relationships with the families, and we were worried about that, and that they would be a bit resentful that I'm taking their young person out, but actually it's not been like that at all. We'll send photos and they're like, that's amazing, I'm so pleased that our children have an opportunity to do this. So we are family inclusive, and to the extent that they'll phone and they'll say, like, we've not got money, or we'll give food bank. And we do have a Christmas party and a summer barbecue, so we do some stuff. But they're teenagers, they don't want to spend time with their mom. It's kind of embarrassing. Like, it's not like I'm cool, I'm still like, but I'm not, you know, like, so it works really well, like having a light touch with families, but it's not completely families, because a lot of the young people are resentful. We don't have money for food because you're buying drugs, you know, so there's a bit of that. But so it's a kind of combination of just doing it really as sensitively as you can. But we do, that's definitely not an issue where they're thinking, why are you doing that and I can't afford it. They're just really happy that they're getting these opportunities. So but we do definitely include families where possible, but our young person is always at the centre of everything we do. And we will signpost parents, and we'll take them to things, but we don't want it to be, we're not the parents worker.
I mean, as Fanula's just put up on the chat, I mean, it really needs to be an and rather than either or. Yeah. I mean, affected family members need often space for themselves, as well as needing to be included in space for the family. And I don't think it should be either a whole family approach or an approach for affected family members. I think it needs to be both, because I think people often do need some space on their own. And some help which is focused on them, but equally they also need to be included, and we need to have a much more family focus as well.
I think, the point you're making though is maybe it is also age appropriate. You know, it needs to be very much geared towards, you know, what is appropriate for the age of the child developmentally and all that. Yeah. So that's really good.
I'm going to draw this to a halt because we're 5 minutes over already. Gallus, can you cope with not asking your question?
Well, actually, I didn't really want to ask a question. I just thought your presentation and your materials were so brilliant that I really would appreciate it if you could write down something for the upcoming AFINET newsletter on the work you're doing, because I am certain that many other people working with children affected by addiction might profit from the experience you have. And we just heard how difficult it is to approach these kids. So this
absolutely.
would be really wonderful if you could do this.
And after this session, as we don't have time now, I want to have a longer conversation about access to the video, because on the one hand, I fully understand the issues about privacy and confidentiality, and on the other hand, this is an incredibly powerful video, and in a sense, there's no point making it if people can't see it. So we have to talk about what the children's position on that is and what your position on that is. I would love to be able, for example, to have this presentation on, as we have with all the other ones, as I've written to you, Rebecca, as we have with all the other ones, on our website, so that anybody can see it. I would love to advertise the video on the AFINET website, but obviously I can't if it needs to be confidential. Anyway, we need to stop. So a huge thank you to Rebecca and colleagues from SPUD. A huge thank you to Janina and to Louise for really excellent presentations. We have about 5 minutes before the AGM, and my task in the next 4 of those 5 minutes is to quickly summarize the entire first day of the conference. So I just want to say I think there have been some really important papers given today covering some really important themes. One of the themes, of course, has been language. We've had presentations in Spanish, in some of the presentation in Portuguese. We've had people from various countries managing wonderfully to speak in English when it's not their first language. I think people have talked about using translators, shown us about the use of translators, shown us about how the use of simultaneous subtitles in presentations. So I think with an international organization like AFINET, it's really, really important to think about how we can be accessible and not always insist that everybody and everything has to be in English. So I think that was very helpful. A second theme actually has been about working with disadvantaged communities. So we heard about in Mexico about the disadvantaged communities in the indigenous population. We heard about Cassandra and the use of technology to try and enable people from disadvantaged communities to access services in a very, very large place like Brazil. Obviously, Anne's presentation was all about people in very disadvantaged communities and their understanding of drug-related deaths and how they might prevent them, and how services deal with them, and about the grief reaction, which is general, obviously, to do with drug-related deaths, but how the being in a disadvantaged community exacerbates that in some ways. We heard about, in a sense, disadvantaged communities in Louise's presentation, about how often people were in many ways disadvantaged when they were opiate using mothers, and so on and so forth. There was a theme that came across in so many of the presentations, and of course with Rebecca as well just now in Roots. Another theme was the immense difficulties of doing research in any and all of these areas. So whether it's going straight back to Guillemina and Marcella's presentation about, yes, we would have wanted to have done a randomized controlled trial, but it was difficult enough getting access to people in this community. And we had to use all sorts of methods to try and get people to actually access the service and start to talk with us, that if we'd tried to introduce an RCT, then we wouldn't have done anything there at all. And then we have all the way through. So, you know, Louise talking about 5 years to actually get the permissions to link the data together, and talking about the huge difficulties of doing research in these areas. Janina talking about the huge difficulties of trying to deal with parents in detoxification and get access to them and get access to their children through them, and so on. So another really important theme that's come out from here, our first day. And I suppose relating to disadvantaged communities, it's the whole thing about actually working with very, very poor people, very, very poor parents, the impact of those people being very poor on their children, and very poor people in all sorts of other remote communities. So I think as a first day, it's been marvelous. And the other thing, I suppose, that's come out as well of all of those themes is, although it's so difficult, although it's that there are problems in the work we try and do, what people are demonstrating in the papers that they've given today is actually it's really important work that we're doing. Affected family members are badly affected, whether they're young children all the way through to women experiencing domestic violence, all the way through to parents trying to deal with the difficulty, the tragedy of their two sons dying when they're 70. Affected family members are very badly affected, and it's amazing the work and the research that's going on where people are overcoming those difficulties and helping people overcome those difficulties by developing services and finding out how effective those services are and really understanding their feelings and their needs so we can develop better services. There we are. That's my summary of where we've got to at the end of the first day. And now I want to hand over to Gallus, the chair of AFINET, who is going to take us through the AGM. Those people who are not members, you're very welcome to stay, but you don't need to. And those who are members, you're very welcome to stay, but you don't need